What is failure? It's never something you want to happen, you know? But it does definitely serve a purpose in, I think, everyone's lives in some way or another. There's a lot to learn about failure that I think people just look over because they didn't get the result they wanted. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, is the usefulness of failure and how it's never over just because you didn't get the result you wanted. First, little anecdote I'll talk about today is from the last season of F1. I watch F1. I know that's a pretty basic motorsport, but it's for the story here. So, the first story that I'm going to talk about that relates to this is Max Verstappen in the 2025 season of Formula One. He was down around 100 points around halfway through the season to both of the McLaren drivers. And at the very last race, he only lost by 1 or 2 points to Lando Norris, but he'd come back. He'd won almost every race, and even though he didn't become the world champion, he still proved what he could do. He could come back from that giant deficit and with a less superior car than they had. And people didn't forget the effort that he put in. Most people actually did want him to win, it felt like. And people saw how hard he tried, and they didn't scold him for not receiving the right result that he wanted. They praised him for how hard he tried and how much of a fight he put up to come back. And that just shows how much effort can do, but also just when you try hard but still fail, people won't tear you down for that unless they're losing. Even after you tried your hardest, was it in vain? And I don't think it ever is in vain unless you really don't learn from it. You just look completely negatively at it, then yes, it was a waste of time. It was in vain. But as long as you learn from your failures, and sometimes they only seem like failures because it's not the results you wanted. But if you had looked back before that had happened and you're like, oh shit, I made it all the way this far doing what I love or trying to achieve one of my goals, that's not failure because you got farther than you ever thought you would. And it's never really the end. You can always try again. And sometimes it's hard to accept that, but I think it's important to realize that you did part of it. You got yourself there. It just didn't quite pan out. And it sucks. It really does. And then my next story is something I'm kind of vulnerable with, but I think for the sake of this, spiel, it's helpful. So it's kind of a long one, but I'll try to summarize it pretty quickly. There was this girl in my biology class the year before last, and I thought she was really pretty, but I never got a chance to talk to her since I never even sat near her, and nobody talked in that class. But anyway, next year she was in my English class, and then she ended up being at my table, and we kind of hit it off, and we grew like a connection together. And then eventually I did get her number, and we would text every day for months, and I even hung out with her a couple times. Kind of went out on a date, I guess, with her. Took her skiing and all this stuff. But, you know, I'd really liked her for the longest time, and then it just didn't end well, you know, after that date, and she just kind of stopped talking to me, and that does kind of suck. I'm not sad about it anymore. Really, I was never sad about it, but I'd come from her not even knowing who I am, just like a random person in my biology class, to like hanging out with her one-on-one multiple times and talking to her all the time. And that just taught me a lot, and that taught me really just what I can do. And I think that's really helpful. Even if it doesn't pan out, I realize I got that far. I got somewhere I never thought I could go. And really looking back on that, even though the outcome was less than ideal at the time, at least, I'm super proud of myself for going that far, because I don't think you have before. And I think that's super helpful for me now and in the future. You know, there's a lot to learn about failure, and I think the most important thing isn't external, like if I did this would have happened. I think the most important thing you can learn from failure, and which I think matters a lot more in a lot of aspects of life, is the internal aspect of, you know, learning about yourself, learning what you can do. Because sometimes you just never know your abilities that you have until you go all out and you really try. You know, you'll never know how much you can bench until you try to PR. And you may fail that, but you at least know now, hey, I can't bench 225. I can only bench 185 or something like that. But you learn a lot about yourself. You learn what you're capable of and what you can actually do and what you can't do. And that can really help you adapt to future scenarios. And it is really helpful to be able to know what you can do, how you can overcome things that you didn't think you could before. And I know I sound really preachy, and like so many people probably in your life that's like, if you just try, you'll never know how far you'll go, which is true, but it's really overstated. And you just need to figure out what you can do, and that only comes through failure, which is really important. You know, success is always really nice to have, but you look at the result when you're analyzing success. You didn't look about how you get there. You didn't reflect much, because the result is what matters, and then you place all that importance on the result, which gets rid of the importance of the process. Like, how did you do this? Why did you do it? You know, you just figure, I got to the end goal of what I want, and now that's that. You know, you don't learn that much from it. You might be proud of yourself, which is never a bad thing, but you realize, you know, that's it. You know, that's what I wanted. You may have further goals that build upon that, but you don't learn from the process to get to that result. And another thing is that even failure can create opportunities for you. You know, you might not get the job. You might go through many interviews, but you inevitably don't get it, you know. But sometimes they can still be impressed. They're just not looking for what you want, and they may call you again or look for look for you in a different role, which can always be helpful, or they can even refer you, you know. I'm not a job expert. I've never had like a stable income. I've done lots of jobs, but never like for one person. I just do like projects, I suppose. But the failure, another thing is that the next try after you fail will be easier, because you know what you messed up on and you know how to fix it. You know what you don't need, what you do need, and that can be very helpful too. It makes it easier, and so each time it just gets easier and easier until you succeed, until you get what you want. And I think the overall moral of this whole spiel that I'm rattling off here is that failure isn't always a bad thing. It can be really helpful, and I think we overlook that. You know, it's a thing to learn from. It's bad, yes, but sometimes we overstate how bad it is in our own mind, and I don't think that gives it justice. That doesn't make you want to learn from how you messed up, because if you're just looking at it with resentment, then you'll just not even care anymore, and that's not what you want. Like, you may realize I just did something I never thought I could, you know? I just, like, did shit. Alright, cut that. You know, I just did something I never thought I could do. That's great, but, you know, I failed in the end, but does it really matter when, you know, I'm still proud of how far I got? I'm still proud that I, you know, got out of my comfort zone, that I learned and I tried something, and it may have not panned out, but I got far, and that matters too. It's not just about, as I keep saying, I know it's over and over, but the result doesn't always matter the most. You know, a lot of people say, like, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And I know that's really cliche, and sometimes it's just completely wrong, but I mean, I think in this case, it's not too far off. The result still does matter, but how you got there matters too. And that doesn't just go for failure, but like, if you got to the place you are, like, stepping on other people's backs, something's gonna happen probably. You're not gonna be able to do your job, you know, or carry out what you got there for. You know, there's a lot of bugs out here, but it is very essential in life to fail. And I know people will be like, oh shit, man, I messed this up. I'm just terrible at everything. I don't know what to do. I just can't do anything right. You know, it happens. You know, sometimes you get in a rut and you can't get out because you just keep messing up, and you just keep failing at something that you really like or you thought you were good at, you know? And that can be tough, but we just learn from our failures. We should learn from lots of aspects of life. Like, I have a lot of video ideas planned for just simple things that have happened in my life. Not even bad or really good things, just things that have happened that have really made me learn something. And that's important to realize that not every event has to be really big. Not everything that you want has to be some giant thing. Sometimes really little things can be just as important, if not more important. So that's that. So in a way, failure isn't always the worst possible outcome. It's not always a bad thing. It's just a part of life that we have to learn about, learn from, and use to improve. Hey, so for anyone who made it to the end, if anyone even did, I just started this channel. You know, this is my first video. I have a ton of video ideas planned. I think about this stuff all the time. I do have an interest in philosophy, but kind of my philosophy, and I want this to feel like just advice from a friend rather than some like stuck-up dude telling you how to live your life. I'm trying not to make things too heavy, taking myself too seriously, because we all mess up. And as much as this is for anyone who needs to hear it, it's also for me. Like, sometimes, actually pretty much all the time, I struggle to take my own advice. I need to hear it from others. And even then, it's hard, but it's helpful. So hearing my own advice, just not in the current moment, I guess, is really helpful. And it also helps me to kind of process my thoughts. I do these pretty much just off my brain. I have just a couple little notes of what to actually talk about, but I just do this kind of off rip on my brain, and I hope it makes me a better speaker, you know, be able to process my words more efficiently. Not like that, you know, try to get rid of filler words like that. But I think it's just as important for me, if not more important, than it is for anyone that watches this. And you may say, I'm full of shit. It's not for everyone, you know? It's for whoever needs to hear it. And if that's not you, then I guess it doesn't matter what I say. Well, anyway, that's it. Go on with the rest of your day. Do something fun. Try to post sometime soon. I got a ton of ideas, but I just need to research them and stuff. All right, see ya.